The road into Ashwood was narrower than Ethan Miller remembered. Overgrown trees leaned inward like skeletal arms, their branches scraping across the roof of his car as if trying to stop him from entering. A mist rolled low across the cracked asphalt, and the headlights cut through it in weak beams that seemed swallowed by the dark. Ashwood, Maine, had always been small, but now it looked like a town already buried. Storefronts stood shuttered, paint peeling away in long strips. There, windows black like empty eye sockets. Street lamps flickered weakly or not at all, casting patches of shadow that seemed to move when Ethan wasn't looking directly at them. His mother's house stood at the end of Willow Lane, its once white siding now gray and brittle. She was frail. When she greeted him, her eyes darting nervously toward the woods behind the house. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan," she whispered, almost trembling. "They're stirring again. I hear them at night." He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, the ramblings of an aging woman, too long alone in a dying town. Yet, that night, lying awake in his childhood bedroom, Ethan heard it too. At first, it was nothing, just the wind pushing through the trees. But then, it sharpened into something deliberate, something with intent. Words, faint, hushed, as if whispered, directly into his ear, though no one stood beside him. "Ethan." He froze, heart hammering. The voice was soft, almost tender, but carried with it a chill that spread through his veins. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination until he heard it again, clearer this time, echoing from the backyard. When morning came, sunlight did nothing to comfort him. Out in the grass behind the house, Ethan found the torn body of a stray dog, its eyes missing, its fur soaked in dried blood. The whispers had been real. The discovery of the mangled dog gnawed at Ethan's thoughts all morning. He told himself not to mention it to his mother. She looked fragile enough, but the image wouldn't leave him. Blood, missing eyes, the sheer brutality of it. Something about the silence of Ashwood made the memory worse, as though the whole town had witnessed the killing and chosen to keep quiet. Later that day, Ethan reconnected with his cousin Sarah. She hadn't left Ashwood like he had. Her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much but spoken too little. When Ethan told her about the whispers, she didn't laugh. She simply lowered her gaze and muttered, "It's starting again." That evening, Sarah introduced him to Emily Carter, a fiery 17-year-old who lived down the street. Unlike Sarah, Emily treated the whole thing like a joke. Whispers in the woods. Please, this town just needs an exorcism. More, a Starbucks. She smirked, but her voice shook slightly, betraying a nervousness she didn't want anyone to notice. The local pastor, Gabriel Hayes, wasn't laughing. When Ethan visited the church, he found the old man alone, lighting candles in the dark sanctuary. "You've heard them, haven't you?" Gabriel asked without turning round. "Once they start calling your name, they don't stop." His voice trembled, but there was steel in his words. That night, Sarah took Ethan to the church basement. Cobwebs hanging like curtains, combed. Emily rolled her eyes, but Ethan leaned in. The coffin held a skeleton of a child, its bones scarred with deep bite marks. Emily's smirk disappeared, and from somewhere far above, muffled through the stone walls, the faintest whisper drifted down. "Hungry." 4 hours after leaving the church basement, Ethan couldn't shake the image of the tiny coffin. The bite marks etched into the child's bones haunted him more than the whispers had. Whatever had stalked Ashwood all those years ago hadn't just taken lives, it had fed Sarah, insisted they dig deeper. "This town keeps its history buried," she told him, spreading yellowed newspapers across her kitchen table. "But it always bleeds through." The headlines were fragmented, brittle with age. Mine collapsed, dozens trapped underground. Another read, "Ashwood mourns, no bodies recovered." Yet, beneath the official reports were smaller, more disturbing clippings: families vanishing, houses abandoned overnight, funerals held with no caskets. Emily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, scoffed at first. Coal mines collapse all the time. People disappear. It doesn't mean ghosts are whispering in the woods. But her confidence faltered as she read a handwritten journal Sarah unearthed from an old trunk. The leather was cracked. The ink faded, but the words were sharp enough to pierce the room's silence. They hunger in the dark. They speak in voices that are not their own. "We built this town on their grave, and now they want it back." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Sarah, whose face had gone pale. Emily set the journal down quickly, her hands trembling despite her forced smirk. A knock at the door startled them. Sheriff Donnelly stood outside, his lined face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "You kids shouldn't be stirring up old stories," he said firmly. His tone wasn't angry, it was fearful. "The past here is better left buried. Trust me." But Ethan pressed him. "You've heard them too, haven't you?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. For a moment, the silence in the room was deafening. Then he muttered, "Once the mind takes notice, it doesn't forget you. Not ever." Before Ethan could ask more, Donnelly left, boots crunching on gravel, as though he couldn't get away fast enough. That night, Ethan lay awake again. The whispers returned, threading through the still air like smoke. This time, they weren't just calling his name. They were laughing, and underneath the laughter came a sound that froze him. To the marrow, something dragging across stone, heavy and wet, as if something deep below the earth had begun to stir. The following evening, a cold drizzle swept through Ashwood, turning the streets slick and shining beneath the broken street lamps. Ethan, Sarah, Emily, and Pastor Gabriel huddled together outside the church, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The sheriff had made himself scarce, avoiding their calls, but his words still echoed in Ethan's mind. Once the mind takes notice, it doesn't forget you. Pastor Gabriel was the first to speak. If the whispers are growing louder, the woods will show you the truth. But we must be prepared for what waits there. Ashwood's rot begins in those trees. Sarah adjusted her jacket, trying to mask her fear. Then, let's see for ourselves. Forced a laugh, shaking her head. We're really going ghost hunting in the middle of the night. You people need Netflix or something. But her flashlight wavered slightly, betraying the nervousness beneath her bravado. They stepped into the woods. The canopy overhead swallowed the moonlight, leaving the beam of their flashlights as their only lifeline. The air was heavy, damp, filled with the smell of earth and decay. Each footstep crunched against damp leaves, the sound far too loud in the suffocating silence. At first, it was only Shadow's branches, twisted like claws. The shapes of abandoned deer stands looming in the dark. But as they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them. The fog grew denser, curling around their ankles like smoke, and the whispers began again. Ethan, Sarah, Emily. The voices slithered through the air, impossible to trace, as though the trees themselves had mouths. Emily tried to laugh again, but it broke halfway into a nervous cough. It's just wind, it's just... She froze, her light catching something dangling ahead. A shape swayed gently from a low branch. At first, Ethan thought it was just a sack or an old tarp. But as the group approached, the reality became horrifyingly clear. It was a body, or what was left of one, a human torso, split open from collarbone to stomach, its organs long gone ribs, jutting out like broken teeth. The head was missing, and the skin had the sickly, bloated sheen of something left to rot. Beneath it, the ground was dark and wet, as though blood had seeped into the soil only hours ago. Emily's scream cut through the trees. Before she clamped her hands over her mouth, Pastor Gabriel made the sign of the cross, his lips whispering a prayer. "They're feeding again," he muttered. "The mine is waking." Sarah grabbed Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "We need to go back." But the forest didn't allow retreat. From behind them came another sound, something dragging through the underbrush, slow and deliberate, as though something heavy and wet was being pulled along the ground. Their flashlights snapped toward the noise, but the beams only caught fog and the tangle of trees. Then the whispers changed. No longer names, no longer soft calls. They became urgent, guttural, almost gleeful. Hungry, hungry, hungry. Run, Ethan hissed. They stumbled deeper, no longer sure of direction, just desperate to escape the suffocating whispers closing in. The trees blurred into an endless wall of black. Roots snatched at their ankles, and branches tore at their clothes. Every few steps, Ethan swore he saw figures moving just beyond the edge of his light shadows, hunched and crawling, their limbs bent wrong, their faces blank hollows. Emily tripped, crashing into the mud. Ethan spun to help her, and in that instant, his beam caught something inches from her face, a mask of bone, wet and gleaming, attached to a body that was barely human skin, flayed in strips, eyes gone, jaw dangling loose. The thing lunged forward, its mouth opening in a scream that wasn't a scream at all, but a chorus of whispers bursting from a single throat. Ethan yanked Emily up, and they tore through the woods, Pastor Gabriel's prayers breaking into panicked gasps behind them. Sarah sobbed openly, her voice cracking. Where are we going? Where the hell are we going? The mine, Gabriel choked out. They're driving us to it. As if to prove his point, the ground beneath him changed. The soil grew darker, wetter, streaked with veins of rust and stone. A stench filled the air, a foul mix of blood and sulfur. Ahead, through the fog, Ethan saw the jagged mouth of the old Ashwood mine. Its wooden supports leaned like broken teeth, and a thin stream of black water seeped from its entrance, trickling into the earth. The whispers rose into a frenzy now, overlapping voices, men, women, children, all calling, all begging, all hungry. Sarah gripped Ethan's hand so tightly it hurt. Emily stood trembling, her bravado stripped away, eyes wide and wet. Pastor Gabriel lifted his cross high, though it shook violently in his grasp. From the darkness of the mine, something moved. Not a figure, not entirely. A mass of shadows crawling across the ground, stretching up the supports, writhing with shapes of limbs and faces that melted and reformed. The stench grew overpowering, the sound of wet stone shifting beneath the earth. Ethan's heart pounded. He realized with sinking horror that Gabriel was right. They hadn't chosen the woods. The woods had chosen them, leading them step by step toward the mine, toward the hunger waiting within. The entrance yawned before them, like the mouth of some ancient beast. Wooden beams leaned inward, rotting and splintered, streaked black with mold. Water dripped steadily from above, each drop echoing into the abyss beyond. The air carried a metallic tang iron, wet stone, and something else. Something coppery and thick. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight. Its beam stretched only a few feet into the darkness, swallowed by the mine's throat. Sarah stood at his side, trembling, while Emily hovered close behind, her earlier bravado long gone. Pastor Gabriel moved slowly, muttering scripture under his breath, his cross clutched tightly in one hand. "They don't want us here," Sarah whispered. Gabriel's reply was barely audible. "No, they do. That's the problem." The whispers began again as they crossed the threshold. At first faint, like voices carried on the wind. Then louder, clearer, reverberating off the wet stone walls. Ethan, Emily, Gabriel. The voices overlapped, rising and falling, a chorus of names, familiar, intimate, suffocating. Ethan's skin prickled as one of the whispers brushed past his ear, warm and wet like breath. He spun, but nothing was there. Deeper they went. The tunnel narrowed, the floor slick with mud and streaks of red-brown that might once have been blood. Old mining tools littered the ground pickaxes with splintered handles, rusted helmets, lanterns shattered into shards. On one wall, Ethan's light caught deep scratches gouged into the rock. Fingers had carved them 10 deep furrows, desperate, ragged. At the end of the grooves lay fragments of bone, still lodged in the stone. Emily gagged and turned away. Sarah gripped Ethan's arm until her nails dug through his sleeve. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wider chamber. The walls glistened with moisture, perhaps something else. The beam of Ethan's flashlight trembled as he realized the stone itself seemed to pulse. Veins of dark crimson streaked through it like capillaries, and at intervals the surface seemed to flex, as though breathing. Pastor Gabriel stopped, his voice shaking as he raised his cross. "This place is no longer stone, it's flesh. The mine has become a living thing." A drip echoed, then another. Ethan tilted his light upward. The ceiling dripped, not water, but blood. Thick rivulets traced the rock, splattering onto the mud, floor in sticky pools. Their faces were frozen in screams, eyes gouged out, chests split wide. Some were skeletons picked clean, others half-rotted, still twitching as though puppeted by invisible strings. Emily shrieked. Her voice seemed to stir them. Heads lolled, mouths opened, and the whispers poured out. Not from the shadows, not from the walls, but from the corpses themselves. Their throats splitting as dozens of voices spilled forth in a hideous chorus. Gabriel raised his cross higher. In the name of God. The floor convulsed. A wet crack split the chamber. From the shadows erupted something that had once been human. Its body was shattered, legs bent at impossible angles, its torso crushed flat, as though by tons of rock. Yet it moved, dragging itself forward, fingers scraping against stone. Its jaw hung loose, broken, teeth snapping in a grotesque rhythm. Emily stumbled back, her flashlight beam cutting across more shapes, pulling themselves free from the wall's miners. Fused into the very stone, their faces half-formed, half-buried. Arms stretching out of the rock like roots torn from the earth. They're part of it, Sarah gasped. The mine, it ate them. The broken miner lunged. Gabriel shoved Emily aside, thrusting the cross forward. For a heartbeat, the creature recoiled, shadows writhing around it. But then, the whispers, a tidal wave of voices, and with a sickening crack, the cross in Gabriel's hand bent and split. No, Gabriel screamed. The creature struck. Clawed hands tore into his chest, ripping fabric and flesh. With a wet crunch, its fingers closed around his ribs. In one violent motion, it yanked, and Gabriel's chest split open. His scream gurgled to silence as the cross tumbled from his hands. His heart was wrenched free, still beating, and the miner pressed it to the wall. The flesh stone absorbed it hungrily, pulsing brighter with each spasm until it disappeared. Gabriel collapsed in a heap, eyes wide, lips still moving in prayer that no sound carried. Emily sobbed uncontrollably, clutching at Ethan. "We have to leave, oh God, please, we have to leave." But the chamber shifted around them. The tunnel behind had closed, the walls drawing inward. The mine was alive, reshaping itself, hurting them. Deeper and deeper they went, dragged by whispers, until they reached the altar. It wasn't stone. It wasn't man-made. It was a growth and outcropping of bone and sinew rising from the earth. Chains dangled from it, slick with blood, ending in hooks, sharp as butcher's knives. Ethan realized with horror they weren't alone. The sheriff stood there, half in shadow. His face was pale, eyes hollow. "I told you," he rasped. "The mine never forgets. Sheriff, help us." Sarah begged. But Donnelly shook his head slowly. "There's no helping, only feeding." Chains shot forward as though alive, wrapping around Emily's wrists and ankles. She shrieked, thrashing as the hooks bit into her flesh, tearing skin down to bone. Blood streamed down her arms, pooling beneath her feet. "Ethan," she screamed. "Don't let it take me, please." He lunged forward, but the sheriff held him back with iron strength. "It's her turn," Donnelly whispered. "Every generation, someone must be given, or we all go." The chains yanked Emily upward, stretching her body against the bone altar. Her cries echoed through the chamber, blending with the whispers. Hooks tore deeper, pulling her limbs apart. Flesh ripped, ribs cracked, her blood sprayed across the walls, which pulsed eagerly, absorbing every drop. Her final scream became a whisper, repeating the same word over and over: hungry, hungry, hungry. Ethan collapsed to his knees, horror freezing him in place. Sarah sobbed beside him, her hand pressed to her mouth. The sheriff turned, his eyes glassy, and murmured, "You think it's over? This is only the beginning." Behind him, the walls rippled. Dozens of faces emerged, stretching the stone mouths, opening in silent agony. Their whispers filled the chamber until Ethan thought his skull would split. The mine had awakened. The bone altar dripped with Emily's remains. The chamber stank of blood, copper, and rot so thick Ethan could barely breathe. His ears rang with the endless chorus of whispers' voices that no longer came from the shadows, but from Emily herself. Her face flickered in the pulsing walls, stretched grotesquely across veins of stone, her mouth moving silently before joining the chant again. Hungry, hungry, hungry. Ethan staggered to his feet, his clothes soaked in the blood that had rained from her body. Sarah clung to him, trembling uncontrollably, tears streaking her dirt-streaked cheeks. The sheriff loomed before them, his figure stiff and unnatural in the shifting red glow. His badge was tarnished, his face waxy, his eyes sunk deep into sockets that seemed to stretch too wide. "You've seen the truth," Donnelly rasped. "The mine doesn't just kill, it feeds, and it always needs more." "Why?" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking under the weight of horror. "Why her? Why anyone?" The sheriff tilted his head, a grotesque crack echoing from his neck. "Because it is older than us, older than this town, older than anything. It doesn't remember mercy. It only remembers hunger." Sarah pulled at Ethan's arm, desperation flooding her voice. "We have to go. Now, before it takes us to." But the walls shifted again. The mine was closing, pressing inward, the tunnel behind them vanishing as if swallowed by flesh. Faces bloomed in the stone mining men, children women all fused together, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. The whispers crescendoed, and from the far corner of the chamber, the sheriff's body began to twist. His skin split in jagged lines across his chest, black veins bulging beneath. His jaw stretched until it unhinged completely, hanging open in an impossible gape. The flesh along his arms peeled back, revealing tendons that whipped like wet ropes. From his back tore jagged fragments of bone, jutting like wings. Donnelly wasn't the sheriff anymore. He was the mind's servant's voice given flesh. Sarah screamed as the thing that had been Donnelly lurched forward. Ethan shoved her aside, just as a hooked bone claw slashed the air where she'd stood, sparks flying as it scraped stone. They ran, though there was nowhere to run. The chamber bent and shifted around them, tunnels opening and closing like throats, walls oozing blood. The whispers were deafening, clawing at their minds, urging them to stop struggling, to give in, keep moving. Ethan shouted, dragging Sarah down a narrow passage that hadn't been there before. His flashlight flickered and died, leaving only the red, throbbing glow of the living walls. The tunnel widened again into another chamber. Smaller, but worse, dozens of bodies hung from the ceiling by roots of sinew, swaying gently. Some were fresh, their eyes rolling, mouths moving in muttered prayers. Others were nothing more than skeletons, skin stretched over bone like paper ink. Their chests rose and fell in unison, though none of them were alive. Sarah's knees buckled. "We can't, Ethan. We can't." But the ground lurched beneath them. With a sickening crack, the floor split, and from the fissure, a hand erupted, massive, skeletal, dripping with black ichor. Then another. Then a head, skull-like, but covered in sheets of shifting flesh. Eyes, nothing but pits of endless dark. The thing was pulling itself from the earth, the mind's true form, the eater. Its mouth opened, the cavern lined, not with teeth, but with grinding stone, metal shards and bones jutting like stalactites. A scream bellowed forth, rattling Ethan's ribs. The Donnelly creature fell to its knees before the rising horror, bowing its broken body. "Feed," it croaked. "Feed, my master." Sarah clutched Ethan's arm. "It's coming for us." Chains lashed from the ceiling, hooks dripping blood. One tore across Sarah's shoulder, ripping a chunk of flesh clean away. She shrieked, stumbling back, blood spraying across the wall, which pulsed greedily as it absorbed her dot. Ethan caught her before she fell completely, his arms slipping on the blood soaking her clothes. "No, no, stay with me. Please, But the chains weren't finished. Two more shot forward, piercing her wrists and yanking her upward. Sarah screamed as she was dragged into the air, her blood raining onto Ethan. "Ethan," she cried, her voice raw, desperate. "Don't let me go." Leaped, grabbing at her legs, trying to pull her down. But the hooks dug deeper, tearing her arms apart inch by inch. Her bones cracked as the mine demanded more. With one final jerk, her body split, torn clean in half. Blood cascaded in a torrent, drenching Ethan from head to toe. Sarah's voice, once so full of life, dissolved into the whispers now echoing. All around him, Ethan dropped to his knees, sobbing, his hands slick with her remains. The sheriff's creature loomed behind him, shadow stretching across the chamber. "There's no fighting it," it hissed, only becoming part of it. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His mind had shattered. His breaths came ragged, his eyes wide, reflecting the pulsing walls. He stumbled toward the altar, Sarah's, blood dripping from his fingertips. The chains moved toward him slowly, almost gently, as if welcoming him home. One hook caressed his cheek, another traced the line of his chest. He didn't resist as they pierced his skin, sliding into his flesh like hot knives into butter. The mine purred. The whispers swelled. "Ethan, Ethan, Ethan," as his body was raised, high, torn open like the others. Ethan's voice joined the chorus, his scream twisted, warped, until it was no longer a scream at all, just another whisper in the endless hunger of Black Hollow. The chamber pulsed once more, satisfied before sealing itself in silence. The sheriff's body slumped, twitching, then melted into the walls outside. The mine looked quiet again, still, waiting. But deep inside, the whispers grew louder, already calling the next names. Weeks later, Black Hollow Mine stood quiet under the autumn sun. The authorities sealed the entrance, claiming unstable rock and toxic gases had made it unsafe. Few in town questioned the decision. Most were relieved to see the cursed place locked away once more. But whispers persisted. Sheriff Donnelly's sudden disappearance raised eyebrows, though the townsfolk never spoke of it aloud. The official story was that he had taken leave, though everyone knew he had no family left, no reason to leave. The truth was buried with the mine, and no one dared to dig it back up. As for Ethan, Sarah, and Emily, no trace of them was ever found. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The newspapers labeled them missing hikers, their photos printed in black and white. Families grieved quietly, unable to comprehend how 3 young lives could vanish so completely at night. However, truckers passing the old mining road swore they heard faint voices drifting from the sealed entrance. A woman crying, a man screaming, and underneath it all, a low, rhythmic whisper repeating the same word over, hungry, 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 hungry. Most drivers sped up, refusing to look back. Yet a few curious, reckless, or perhaps lured, parked their rigs and walked closer. None of them were ever seen again. And so, the town carried on, pretending the mine was nothing more than a dangerous hole in the ground. But beneath the surface, the hunger never stopped. The silence of Black Hollow was only a mask, waiting for the next voice to join the endless, whispering choir.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.